naturally, your essential self wants to express itself with creativity, with joy, with expressiveness. And anytime that we're stop ourselves from doing that, that's self-limitation.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to episode 4 of the 10x model with Gene and I. And today we're going to do something that's going to really help you connect with yourself in a way that's deep and in a way that's profound. And one of the aspects of 10x is for you to step into who you truly are, for you to be able to create that access with yourself, because that has unlimited resources, that has unlimited potential and ample amount of greatness. Now, one of the ways to experience that would be to think about a time. Take a moment, pause this if you need to, and take a moment to just think about a time when you experienced when you were truly in flow, truly present, and produce something magical, produce something extraordinary. Just think about a time where maybe you thought it was difficult, maybe it wasn't, but what you did created something amazing and everything worked out perfectly well. And maybe even you were surprised with yourself that, oh, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So if you again need to take a moment to pause this, then pause this so that you can really think about that moment, step into that moment and just experience it to really understand what was that like.
Mhm.
And then, assuming that you're back now and you've thought about that moment, one of the things to think about is that what happened in that moment?
Mhm.
What created that state of flow? What created this natural potential, brought out your natural self? Everything worked according to how you want to. There was no effort per se, it just became
Right.
effortless experience.
Right.
What happened there? So that's something that you can reflect on.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say about that is that as we know, I mean, there's a lot of research that's been done on flow, and flow can be experienced in any context. It's not limited to performance context, for example, though that's a major piece of it. It's creative context. It's active, any active engagement that we have with ourselves in the world, we can be in flow. And so part of the distinction is between being in flow and being out of flow. Um, one of the I like to think in terms of origin story. One of the ways that I think about that is that what's the first occasion where we experience something of significance that then establishes a pattern for us and makes sense out of our life to ourselves. And for me, that the origin story for flow is when I was in the 5th grade. My dad was a basketball player himself when he was in school, and he and I spent a lot of time playing basketball, but not on a team. This was like I was still young and all that kind of stuff. But the first real school team I was on was 5th grade. And I remember vividly the feeling that I had that actually convinced me to, I would say, become a basketball player, not just to play basketball. And that was, I was on the kind of the left wing. I was probably, 20, 25 feet from the basket. And you throw up a ball and you don't really know whether it's going to go in or not. But I kind of took a dribble, went to my left, kind of took a jump shot, and the ball swished. And it was like, oh, man, the feeling every time stopped. I mean, here you are, I'm how old? I'm maybe 11 years old. And it just, everything stopped. And we're just like, this is amazing to me. Amazing. And I would say that established a pattern, particularly in sports, where I remember another one in high school where I was totally in flow. I hit 35 points, and like they just kept passing me the ball because I just kept shooting it up from, it's like it felt like I could shoot from anywhere and the ball was going to go in. And then when I was in college, the same thing. So it's kind of like these experiences can generalize across context. And what we're really interested in is helping you to identify uh, a reference experience that you too could call maybe your origin experience of flow, and that we begin to develop the capacity to extend to other contexts than, for example, in my case, other contexts than sports. I did it. I did it in academics. I do it in relationships. I do it in my professional work today. It's like these are experiences that we can create for ourselves. And part of the value and the beauty of the 10X model is that as we kind of align ourselves and embody the 10X model, it actually becomes easier to get ourselves into flow. And that flow is a way of talking about accessing ourself in a way that we know is possible, but we often don't know how. And so the 10X model helps us to actually know the how.
Yeah. So with the 10x model, we will create access to this part of ourselves, and we would call this our essential self. So with the 10x model, we can access this essential self, which basically is that you're in the state of flow and you can experience things in magical and beautiful way, in a way that's brilliant.
Yeah,
But one of the presupposition that we also make is that who we are naturally is our essential self.
that's right.
We live within our essential self. We have unlimited potential, and that's who we are naturally. Then life happens.
Yeah, right.
A part of life happens, and then
Yeah.
that tends to maybe take us away, away from our essential self.
I think that is a great comment there because that's right. Life happens, and we draw conclusions from that. We have experiences with our parents, our siblings, our classmates, our teachers, our coaches, the people in our lives who influence us. And typically, when we're young, we don't have sufficient information to make a fully accurate conclusion about who we are, how the world is, and all that. So we actually create self-limiting beliefs, and those beliefs create patterns, and those patterns replicate over time, and we find ourselves, as adults, living out patterns that got established in our childhood. And that's what we're clear on, is that as we remove those constraints that come from the self limitations, we actually make it easier for that natural essential self to express itself. And one of the ways we think about the model is that the essential self, we don't think of it as a behavioral expression, rather we think of it as a source of behavioral expressions. And that when we are rightly aligned and properly aligned, uh, we call that a core identity. So in other words, for me, it was like I am basketball. Was the core identity that came out of that fifth grade experience for me, because it's like suddenly my whole being was to play basketball, and that's only one context of life, right? But once we understand that we know what flow is, we have a reference to it, we start to find it in other contexts, we can develop other core identities as well. And of course, what happens is you get the contrast. You get the contrast between the self limitations, I'm not enough, or, what are people going to think? They're going to reject me, or, they're going to judge me, or whatever those limitations are that we feel probably unconsciously haven't thought about, but unconsciously have chosen. When we remove those, we give ourselves access to the unfettered expression of our essential self through a core identity, which is associated with a particular context of life.
Right. Yeah. So, so one of the key insight here to kind of really pay attention to is that we are naturally in our essential self. And if we let go of the self limitation, that we would probably just live in state of flow.
Yeah,
But then life happens, and we build these patterns, then we live in these patterns, we run these patterns, and that takes us away from our natural state of flow, natural
yeah,
state of resourcefulness. And so that's one of the sort of key insights, and one of the things that you can also pay attention to is that where you at and what happens when you're in your natural state of flow, when you are in your essential self, and what are some of the things that you can pay attention to. And I'm sure in your day-to-day life you would experience this. Most times it's not in your awareness, it's not in our awareness. And then you can maybe also pay attention to when you impose these limitations on yourself, when you run some of the patterns that you're already aware of. And like Gene said, that could be, I'm not good enough, or I'll get rejected, I'll be judged. And then what's that? Because that's when you're moving away from your essential self. And what's your experience then? What
Yeah.
happens? And the more you create this distinction, the more you will be able to effortlessly be in your essential self.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And, being able to self reflect, in our last podcast, we talked about self reflection and recognizing that I just hit a limitation and I may not even actually know what that pattern is or what that limitation is, but I feel it, I sense it, I have this engagement with it, shall we say. And one of the things that we really encourage using the 10X model is to develop the resources and tools to actually address that self limitations or constraints in successful ways so that effectively we don't ever have to be stuck once we develop those kinds of resources. And I mean, that's also an encouragement to embody the 10X model because there are lots of possibilities that we have as we work through the model, and we will do that over the course of these podcasts, and we'll talk about more distinctions that go with that. But the encouragement to start with today is really that there, as Nishith is saying, naturally your essential self wants to express itself with creativity, with joy, with expressiveness. And anytime that we're stop ourselves from doing that, that's self-limitation. So I think what we want to do now is maybe just talk about the next level, if you will, of the model, which is core identity versus counterfeit identity. So the core identities are in the way we think about this, that's actually where the expression of our essential self is manifested. And counterfeit identity is where the expression of the constraints are manifested. So if we say I'm not enough as a belief, a self-limiting belief, that is the foundation for a counterfeit identity because it's not true. In our essential self, we are enough, but because of life experience, as Nisha said, experience happens, right? Life happens. We've made some conclusions or decisions about ourselves that are self-limiting. So when we identify something like that kind of belief, there is the flip side to the core identity. So the core identity statement, in contrast to that, I am not enough, would be I am enoughness. And when we talk
Mm.
about core identities, what we're talking about is an internal state. It's not just a role or it's not just a singular behavior. It's actually an internal state. And from that internal state, we generate behaviors that reinforce and express the essence of that core identity. So we start to see ourselves with a very different light. We start to act in very different ways, and we interpret the world through this other filter. And we'll talk about that too later. But just to say that we're never stuck when we've got this model operating for us, because when we hit a core identity, we are just flow in it, and that is the flow of our essential self. When we hit a constraint or self limitation, we flip it into a core identity so that we manifest that behavior with respect to the core identity.
Yeah. Right. So just to kind of put this into labels so that it's easy to kind of grasp, would be that our natural self is our essential self, and then we put self limitation, and for the ease of working with it, we would call that as constructed self. That's the
Yep.
label to use, and our core identities is an expression of our essential self, and which is our natural state of creativity and flow and joy and so many other things. And then there is the counterfeit identities, which sort of comes from our constructed self because
That's
of
right.
the self-limiting patterns and because of everything happens, and we build those patterns. And just mention that those patterns get developed because they supported us at some point,
Yeah.
but then we carry them, and we carry them where it's not supporting us or where it's not useful.
Yep.
And I feel it's then to
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey. It truly is a journey that we're talking about. And I think anyone who's kind of begun the journey recognizes that, okay, it takes time to become aware of those self limitations and to adjust. But at least there's a sense in beginning to get a handle on what the 10x model is, how you do that. And so in some sense, it's almost like a user manual for life, where we say, okay, we identify those limitations, where if we feel stuck or if we feel frustrated or if there are circumstances that are just not working out for us, we understand that we have agency to change that and to change it in a way that's productive for us and for other people. And that kind of presupposition that we never have to be stuck. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't get stuck. It just means we don't have to stay stuck. Is a really powerful example of understanding what's waiting for us in terms of our essential self. And one of the things that's very clear is that the world we live in, is full of limitations. I mean, we think about our workplace, or we think about our families or whatever. And the human condition operates, right? And we have to interact with other people, and they're not like we are. And we have to figure out how do we communicate with them and stuff like all of that. Kind of in a way tends to limit us, and yet the way we show up as we get access to our essential self and express it through our core identities, we create an energetic presence that influences the systems of which we're part, influences the family, influences our teams that we work with, influences our clients if we're coaches. It is a fantastic experience to recognize that this is more than nonverbal communication. It's actually energetic communication. And there's a very powerful way in which that operates in the lives. It's like the image I have is of a tuning fork. So our essential self, when it's free, is a tuning fork that vibrates at a frequency that invites other people to vibrate at that same frequency. And so that's partly how we create flow in a larger context than just simply an individual context, whether that be in our family or at our work or with our friends or whatever. We want to recognize the influence that we bring through the way in which we show up energetically.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we spoke about is that we all have reference experiences for it. How would someone access or step into this essential self now, tomorrow, when they want to?
Well, I think it's a great question, because I think that the starting point is just to recognize that we is to recognize the concept of essential self. In other words, to say, okay, do I really trust that my essence of who I am, the real essence of who I am, is all that I need to be. I don't need to create something more in order to be who I am. And the pressure, we know that the pressure in society is not to be who we are. I mean, that's just, it's to conform in order to belong. And we know that belonging is so important just for our mental health, our physical health, our way of being. So I think that first step is simply going, yes, there is such a thing as essential self. That's who I was created to be. And that when I have experienced the very best of myself in flow, that is an expression through a core identity of my essential self. So it's just getting that presupposition is starting point. And then I think the second step is that we, as you said earlier, Nishith, we identify reference experience and what I was calling my origin experience of flow. Find a time, it doesn't have to be the first time, but a time that's really powerful where everything worked. It's like, oh gosh, it's like there were no limitations that you put on yourself. It's like, gosh, everything fell into place and you were just amazed and it exceeded your expectations. That in itself is a 10x outcome for sure. But it's also 10x outcomes like that are expressions of our essential self. So finding a reference experience where you're in flow. And then the third step is, okay, generalize that to other contexts. So you found one. Once you found one, you can find others. Because, I mean, the truth about this is we have multiple times where our essential self kind of oozes out of us. It kind of like, oh gosh, it just showed up. Not because we were conscious or thinking about it, it just kind of showed up. And I think that's a fantastic personal experience we have. But it's what we're talking about is developing access to that essential self through our core identities, and recognize that in the different contexts, there are actually different core identities expressing themselves, because identity generates behavior, produces outcomes. So if I go, I am basketball, what I produced was excellence in basketball. That was an expression of my core identity. And in that expression, I experienced flow of my essential self. And we all have that. But also, I would just say, I remember, for example, the first time I went to Europe and actually taught in a conference of 150 people, and I was absolutely in flow. I mean, I did not plan that, but it happened, and it was like, as you're saying, it's magical. 150 people got a standing ovation. I never imagined. I don't think I've ever had a standing ovation since. But it totally swept me off my feet emotionally, that I could produce something like that. I did not believe before then I could actually do that. And yet that first time it set me up for moving to Europe, living and working in Europe, and is so foundational to so much of the work I do today. And that's because I experienced my essential self, and realized, wait a second, it's not only I can do it in basketball, it's also I can do it professionally. And there we all have examples like that. So this is not unique to us. So find other contexts. That's the third step. Find other contexts where that's true. And then, if you pay attention to the whole concept of flow, it's like, finding those situations where you're being stretched, and this is really kind of foundational to the 10X model itself, is that you're being stretched right to the edge of your capacity, which is like on that presentation in Europe. I was stretched because I did not know I could do that. And yet I said, I'll put myself in that circumstance. That's my part of it. But then I drew out of my essential self through that core identity that I could do it. And the same is true for you. The same is true. You can do this. And that's I would say, is the next step. And that is to put yourself in context where you're being stretched beyond what you've ever done before, and discovering, oh, I can do this. So just a very simple everyday example is you're stuck, and you go, okay, if you access this idea that we're talking about, you never have to stay stuck. You access that and go, okay, how is it that I can not be stuck, because I don't have to be stuck? And then you're not. And then you do whatever you do and you're not. That is an everyday occurrence in my life. I do that regularly because I get stuck regularly, but I don't stay stuck. And that's our hope and wish for you.
Yeah. So that seems like a great place to kind of focus on for today. I mean, the 4 steps that Gene just mentioned could be your exercise and process for today to kind of pay attention to. So one is to kind of create access to your essential self. So step 1 is to create that awareness. And that can happen by just being aware of when you're in your essential self in your day-to-day life. And then the step 2 is to find the reference experiences, and we would have so many of the reference experiences to kind of tap into. And step 3 is cross context.
Yeah.
So where else is this true? Where else
Yeah.
can I access this state? So in a way, it's like finding reference experiences, but finding it in multiple different contexts, not just being in one context. And part of the key criteria would be to focus on experiences where you're moving out of your comfort zone. There's a little bit of stretch. There's a little bit of going like, okay, if it's something that's natural, then you probably don't need to access this for yourself because it's natural. You're already in it. So it's about the places where you can't access this, and that's when you operate from the place of trust. And
Yeah.
so think about experiences where you can put yourself out of that, out of your comfort zone, and then experience this.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fourth one is really just to go and create new opportunities for yourself.
So that could be one of the things to pay attention to. And of course, now what we have done is also sets a really good foundation for one of the components that we spoke about earlier, the 10x identity. So this is like a good foundation for it. So the more you can access your essential self, the more you can step into your 10x identity as well, which is something that we're going to speak about in the coming episodes.
Right.
So you need to come back if you want to listen to that.
Yes, please do. Please do. That's great.
Great. And is there anything, Gene, that we want to kind of share as a process in the context of how essential self is expressing in terms of core identity? So do we want to kind of unpack that? But this is good for today's episode.
Yeah, I think this is good for today. I think, it's not a usual process for people, I think, but once you kind of get a hold of it, it suddenly becomes, I really like the concept of agency. I have agency in my own life. I can actually make this happen. And the more times I activate that agency, the greater sense of confidence I have in who I am. And therefore, my willingness to kind of be who I am, the fullness, the authenticity. And we know that authentic people become attractive to other people, to opportunities, to life experiences that if you're just conforming to the world, you don't get the same opportunities. So this is really, it's a bit of this is in fact a stretch in itself to recognize what the 10x model offers you as you go forward in your life. And we encourage you to embody it. So
Yeah. Okay. Great, brilliant. So that's going to be our exercise, and that's going to be a process for today. And just to reiterate, one of the key insights that has made a huge difference to me, so I keep reiterating, it's the idea that you are your essential self.
right.
It's just you don't need to do this exercise or do something to get there,
That's
and
right.
that's the fundamental idea behind it. What we are doing this as a process is to create more access to who you already are,
Yes.
and so naturally one of the simplest thing you can do is just let yourself be,
Yeah.
and and you would be in your essential self.
Yeah.
But creating this reference experiences, going cross context, and creating a stretch, these are amazing ways to create that access to your natural self and yourself that can create unlimited possibilities. Set such a great foundation for the 10x model, because
Mhm.
part of the 10x model is that we are looking for exponential outcomes, exponential goal, exponential impact.
Mhm.
And when you step into your essential self, that's something that naturally happens. Your impact naturally increases and your impact exponentially grows, anyways. So, yeah, probably after this, you might not even need this podcast, but you will. So come back. But it's useful to pay attention to that. So
Yeah.
that's your process for today. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts from
No, I'm
Eugene?
good. I think it's great.
Okay. Great. So do those exercises, do those processes. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, then remember to subscribe and like so that you can get notification for the upcoming episode. Specifically, the one related to this is going to be about the 10x identity. And of course, if you're watching it on other podcast platforms, you can also subscribe so you get the notification for it. And please share your thoughts and reflections of what happens with you as you've done this process, as you've gone through exploring your essential self, maybe distinctions with your constructed self, and share it with us so that we know what's going on with you, we know what's working, and then we can even mold the future episodes in a way that makes most sense for you.
Mm. Yeah.
So, and like I've always said, that others can learn from you as well. When you share it, might make a difference to someone else. So, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll see you again next time.
Yeah. Thanks.